I'm going to demonstrate the Victorian Cross for the border and the hair in the basket here on my doodle cloth. I've labeled mine simply because when I put these things in my archives, I sometimes need to remind myself which project I go with. So we're going to start with an away waist knot or a buried waist knot. Either one is a good option. I'm going to start with the buried style right now, but in class we'll talk about the away waist knot as well. You're going to put a knot in the end of your thread, and it's going to stay on the top of your fabric. Now in this case, I'm not really worried about exactly where I'm starting, but on your project you're going to want to start 3 inches down from the top and 3 inches in from the side. The Victorian Cross is worked right to left, but I'm going to be starting in here in the upper left-hand corner, and simply because in class there is stitching that we're going to work on the left-hand side, so I want to get this corner established first. I want my waist knot to be slightly below where I'm going to be stitching. So for right now, I want to establish what's going to be the upper left-hand corner, the extreme upper left-hand corner of my project. And in this case, I'm going to say it's going to be right here. So I'm going to turn my fabric upside down, so I'm still working right to left. Now this is for a right-handed stitcher, and that's where my corner is going to be. So from there, I want to actually come in 2 threads. And you'll notice that I'm starting next to an upright linen thread. And my stitch is 2 threads wide and 2 threads high. So I'm going to scoop up these 2 threads. And I'm going to finish the stitch and scoop up, going ahead by 2 threads to put my needle where my next stitch will begin. Now, when you're doing just a row of Victorian Cross, it's very easy to get this rhythm. But in this case, 2 symbols in from the corner, I actually have a stitch right here. So as I finish this stitch, I'm going to come up here. So I'm continuing to work in a sewing motion. Let's see if I can come in closer here. To finish that stitch, and that puts my needle where my next stitch is going to begin. So I'm going to scoop up these 2 threads and complete this stitch. Then as I finish that stitch, I'm going to put my needle right here and continue on with the top row. So I'm going to finish that stitch and do the next one. And now I'm going to come up here and do the stitch that's kind of making the pattern across the top of the thing. I do it this way because I like to stitch what I call one and done. I don't want to stitch the single row all the way across and then go back and do the extra little stitches. Now, if I've planned the placement of my knot, if I planned it well, then I've been burying the tail as I've been going along. So let's take a look. Here's the tail, and it's been pretty well secured by the stitches across the top. I'm going to do a couple more before I cut that away. So again, I'm stitching the top row and the second row at the same time by doing 2 traditional Victorian Cross stitches, and then scooping up towards the top here to do the single stitch. Whoops, look what I just did. Yes, it does help to count and to get your rhythm. Okay, let's back that up. I don't always unthread my needle when I make a mistake. If I feel like I can back up without making a tangled mess, that's what I do. Okay, so I have obviously interrupted my rhythm, so I'm not going to rip out that other stitch. I'm just going to come in here and just do this one the traditional way. And then that puts me back where I want to be. Yeah, so it's good to get a rhythm going, and once we get rid of this waist knot, I think it'll be a little bit easier. Okay, so I'm going to park my needle here, and in cutting off this knot, and I don't like to stitch all the way up to the knot, because what I would rather do is turn it over and clip it from the back. And as always, I'm cutting what I call dangerously close and not leaving any kind of a tail on the back. And once I take that out, that's wasted. So turning this back right side up, you can see where what we're stitching here is going to be across the top. This will be my top left-hand corner stitch, and then from there I'll come down. So let me stitch a little bit more here so you can see the rhythm without fussing with the waist knot. So again, doing a complete stitch with each motion is either beginning or ending a stitch, and I'm doing complete stitches as I'm going along, and then doing the extra little stitch right here, and then coming back and doing this way. So that is the beginning of the stitch. Now I'm going to go ahead, I'm just going to park this thread here because I want to start a new thread to do the stitching down the side, and I'm just making these big loopy stitches just to get it out of the way. And so now I'm going to rethread my needle and start from this corner coming down. Since I have these stitches established, I don't have to do the buried waist knot this time. Instead, I can simply anchor my thread by coming under the existing stitches. I'm going to leave a little bit of a tail, simply because I don't want to accidentally pull my thread out, and then I will go back and clip that off. So now coming down the side, I'm going to stitch what most people consider just the traditional Danish method, But once you get the rhythm going, you'll see that it actually is much more similar to the Victorian cross stitch method. So I'm stitching, and I really find that this goes very quickly when you sew rather than poke and pull. But of course, you know, there's nothing wrong with doing it the other way as well. So I'm finishing each stitch as I'm going along. Whoops, I have snagged something on the back. I don't know what. Well, that's a first. I've got, got something going on there. I don't know what. Let's take a look. Well, that's interesting. I somehow pierced the thread. Okay. So we're doing first half cross, and then the second one, completing that stitch and coming 2 more threads below it to start the next stitch. Scooping up 2 threads on one side, scooping up actually 4 threads on the other side, coming down 2 more threads from where I was stitching the previous stitch. So scoop up 2 on this side and 4 on this side. So you can see where the motion is really very similar to doing the Victorian cross when you're just stitching a Victorian cross straight across and not doing this fancy sort of, actually reminds me of what they call dental work on colonial homes. Very often the right under the roof line you would find that type of a design. So that's going to get you started here in the corner, and you can work as far over as you want and as far down as you want coming down the side. And next I'm going to show you how to do the fishbone stitch. Oh, what I'm going to do here again, I'm not going to cut this thread off. I'm just going to, again, park it by taking great big loopy stitches over here. I know a lot of people kind of wrap it around a pin or whatever, but I find that this really keeps it out of the way. I'm going to do the fishbone stitch down here on the bottom. Again, I'm using a waist knot, which means I'll put a knot on the end of my thread, and that's going to stay on the surface of my fabric. And I'm going to put it just a couple of inches away from where I plan on starting my stitch. Now the fishbone stitch, I like to do as much sewing as much stitching as I can using the sewing method, and I pretty much can do part of this sewing, but part of it I can't. But I'm going to start by just poking and pulling. So the first step is going to be just a regular half cross, so over 2 and up 2. From that point where I ended my stitch, I'm coming down 4 threads and coming into a shared hole with the first stitch. After that, I'm coming in 2 threads in from kind of the point, so I'm actually exactly in the middle in between those 2 stitches, and then come up and over 2, come straight down 4, and back into that shared hole. Going to start the next stitch just 2 linen threads away, so you're in between kind of the 2 parts of, I mean, if you think of this as being like an arrow, you're right in the middle of it. And then 2 threads away and come down 4. So if you want to do a little bit of the sewing stitch with this, what I do is when I come up from this point, I come down, scoop up the 4 threads. I make sure I've got 4 threads on my needle, and that puts me in the place of the next stitch. What I can't seem to master is going this way. I just find that to be really, really awkward. So I tend to poke and pull that part of the stitch. And then do this part as a sewing stitch. And that's the fishbone stitch.